The enforcement actions that occurred were against the largest private equity funds. There were also other funds that were fined, but those are the ones that always make the big splash and gets everyone's attention. So, for instance, for Apollo, they had 4 funds that had a number of issues that the SEC found. So one was that they had accelerating monitoring fees. They also said that they misled investors on fees and other loan agreements that they had. So because of that, they had an enforcement and a fine against them for $52.7 million. Apollo, of course, agreed to the fine, but didn't admit to any wrongdoing, but they did pay the fine. Another one of the larger funds that were looked at was Blackstone, and Blackstone had a similar issue with the monitoring fees. And Blackstone was fined about $32.9 million, of which about $29 million of that 32 was paid to the investors. So they were also had several issues regarding the fees and expenses. It shows that they should also have compliance procedures in place so that they can monitor at all times what they're doing in terms of the fees and allocations. As I said, they should also create a fee and expense policy, which should be transparent to the LPs, so the LPs should be able to take a look at it, review it, agree with it. It also shows that what the SEC considers conflicts of interest, so whether it's something like an operating partner or whether it's agreements that they're asking the portfolio companies to sign, the SEC is considering those things conflict of interest because they are able, the fund advisors are able to determine who gets hired. The larger funds, which have the fees generated from the funds, typically can put together an LP advisory board. You may not see that as much with the smaller or middle market funds, but they do have them. But mostly on all the larger funds, they'll have them. And what this advisory board is for is to kind of run past them certain items which the investment advisor may think are correct to be allocated a certain way, but wants to get buy-in from the LP advisory committee. It's kind of a checks and balances, make sure that there's some transparency and disclosure, and also makes it good for the investment advisor because this way he's got some documentation in case the SEC comes in to take a look that they're just not making decisions on their own. Much more common now than they were 2, 3, 4 years ago. You have a lot of things that happened once the enforcement actions started, and everybody went back and started looking at their agreements and looking how they were allocating their expenses and whether or not they were doing management fee offsets. So some of the enforcement actions we discussed earlier, some of them the SEC went back to 2001 to look at how the expenses were allocated. There was a case with W.L. Ross that they had gone back and reviewed all their expenses. There was mention by the SEC in their report that the fact that Ross self-reported and also already had started the process of reimbursing the investors, that probably reduced the amount of the fine. So it was only $2.3 million, might have been more. I think if you find that there's something wrong or something's happened that you need to self-report, you're probably still going to get fined. There still may be, some kind of enforcement action. But if you don't report and you get found, obviously it's a lot worse. So I think if you find issues during your normal compliance process, or even if you've gone back in time to look at the way you used to do things, self-reporting is the way to go.